If you think about compost, you're probably thinking about either how to get the most out of your garden or how to cut down on some of your food waste. Both are important. Compost is a natural part of our ecosystems, providing vital nutrients to plants and animals up and down the food chain. And food waste represents 24% of our landfills and contributes about 6 to 8% of greenhouse gas emissions that drive climate change. While cutting down on food waste won't stop climate change overnight, it would be a major win, and is arguably one of the easiest targets for us to meet. So today on the show, we're talking all about compost, what it is, how to do it, and ways we can get more people invested in helping the planet just by properly letting their food decompose. I'm Weston Twardowski, an instructor and the Associate Director of Rice University's Center for Environmental Studies and the Rice Sustainability Institute's Eco Studio. And you're listening to Gulf Streams on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM. Here we talk with leading experts and community leaders to better understand the environmental problems and potential solutions facing our community. A quick reminder that you can catch up on Gulf Streams anytime through our podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Let's talk about composting. Chris Wood is the co-founder of Moonshot Compost. Ashley Fitzpatrick is the sustainability director at Moonshot. And Kristianna Bowles, who's been on the program before, is the sustainability program coordinator here at Rice University. Thank you all so much. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us.
Great. So I was telling you before this, I'm really excited to talk through composting. It's something that I've wanted to feature on the program for a long time. When I first landed in Houston, I was seeing a lot of news about Moonshot at that point, and then found out there was this Rice partnership that was really interesting. And then a few weeks ago, we actually hit a milestone of 1 million pounds of compost having been composted here at Rice. And we're, a small institution, but still quite a few thousand people. So that makes sense. But with that, I was just like, all right, we need to sit down and actually talk about what composting is, how this works, and what's going on. Because I think for a lot of people, we have a very, kind of vague idea that compost is a soil additive that makes my plants grow. And, it's food that somehow decomposes and becomes good stuff. And beyond that, I don't think we really know much about what it is or how it works. So just to start off, I would love for you to introduce yourselves and then tell us a little bit about where Moonshot came from, and then we'll dive into a little bit on the nitty-gritty of composting.
Yeah, that's great. My name's Chris Wood. I'm co-founder of Moonshot Compost, and we founded just about 4 years ago, largely because we saw a gap in Houston between people that wanted to compost facilities that wanted to accept food waste, but there was no real great mechanism for moving food waste to these compost facilities. Mm. As you would expect, food waste is kind of disgusting. And maybe as you wouldn't expect, it's also really heavy. Like our bodies, it's 70 to 80% water. And so the logistics for gathering a clean stream of food waste and taking it to a compost facility to be composted is tricky. Thankfully, there's a couple hundred micro haulers across the country trying to solve that problem as well. But that hadn't really come to Houston yet. And so my brother-in-law and I, Joe Villa, started looking at our trash cans. We saw how valuable food waste is. He came with a background in transportation logistics, and we said, let's just figure it out. And 1 month after we decided to figure it out, COVID hit, and we entered a global pandemic. That slowed us down a little bit.
I'm shocked by that. I've not heard that COVID slowed people down from anywhere else in life.
And do you remember at the beginning, we thought you got COVID from touching stuff.
Oh, God, yeah.
And so we're like, oh, this is great. We're just going to go collect food waste from people and containers they keep in their house. So the beginning of our business was all about masks and gloves and spray bottles of disinfectant, and we're wiping everything down. And thankfully, as the science around that changed, we realized we didn't have to wipe things down quite as much.
Yeah.
But those were our early days. And what's ironic is both my parents went to Rice, were graduates. We wanted so badly to work with Rice University from before the time that we were even collecting. And we were having the hardest time connecting with Rice. It's hard during COVID to track down people to university that might want to compost. But they were our third commercial subscriber. And when we found the right people, boy, did we ever find the right people. And it got going really fast.
Well, that makes me curious, actually, Kristianna, and I'm going to ask you a question in which, there's no reason for you to have a solid answer. But I mean, do you think composting is a fairly recent thing for universities? Do you think this is something we've seen actually lots of universities been doing it for forever? Or have we seen, with a lot of green turns, a lot of universities coming out with, really advanced sustainability plans over the last few years? Is this something that a lot of different universities are having to kind of develop on the fly now over the last few years or decade?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a mixture. It really depends on where you're at within the United States and how long the institution has already been in the sustainability game, if you will. Obviously, some of our peer institutions that we compare ourselves to and look to be sustainability leaders like Stanford, Dickinson College, other places like that have been composting for a long time. I think more institutions compost than we realize. They just likely do it in the back of house side as they're prepping in the kitchens. I think more are doing like what Rice does, where we have back of house as well as front of house, like post-consumer composting. Obviously, post-consumer is a little bit trickier because you have to work to educate your populace that's coming into your dining halls, your serveries, what have you. So I can imagine that's a little bit trickier to set up, whereas in the kitchens, you have your kitchen staff who you can clearly keep an eye on of what's going into the compost bin and what shouldn't be. So I definitely have seen in my past 7 years in sustainability in higher ed a growth in composting, both back of house and then more recently like a surge for front of house composting.
Sorry, can you break down what you mean by front of house and back of house? And what is this actual process that you're getting at? Yeah.
So back of house, I see it as anything happening before the food goes out on the line. With Rice, all of our serveries are self-serve, so just like a random buffet that you would go to. So back of house would be as they're peeling vegetables. So think of peeling and washing potatoes, cutting up stuff, any kind of scraps as they're, deboning chicken or what have you.
So all the stuff that goes into food prep as it's being cooked, as opposed to that after people have been eating it and maybe, got one too many slices of pizza and still have quite a bit on their plate.
Yes, exactly. And then front of house is just the opposite. After you grab your food, realize, oh, I was really excited. This is my favorite meal here at Rice. I'm going to load up my plate and, oh my goodness, my stomach is not as big as my eyes. Anything you scrape off into the compost bin after that is what we consider front of house. Or in the case of Rice as well, our housing and dining team does a fantastic job of trying to mitigate any food waste. So based on the health codes they have to follow, anything that's been put on the line, because it is self-serve, has to be composted afterwards due to health code. And they do a fantastic job with monitoring swipes into and out of the dining facilities at each serving time to make sure they're making just the right amount of food. That way there's not a lot of that waste coming off the line after students are done.
Wow. Okay, I want to get back into this because this is actually something that, I feel like the evolution of how cafeterias have worked since the time that I was in school and was like starting to see some news articles on some of these conversations was really interesting. But we kind of skipped over Ashley. I do want to give you a chance here to talk about, what brought you into composting and how you got into this work.
So in addition to my current role at Moonshot, I am also an alum of Rice.
Oh, okay.
So I graduated from Rice in 2022, and during the most of my 4 years here, I worked in the sustainability office under Richard Johnson. So I started in that role because of composting. I had composted at my high school. I got to Rice the summer before I matriculated and just happened to notice that there was a lot of food being produced here, a lot of food waste being produced, and that was just over a summer, not even during the full semester. I was kind of feeling like there was something to be done here. So I started looking into it, kind of got up to speed on what different student groups had done on campus, then showed up to Richard Johnson's office and said, hey, I think we have some work that we can do here. Let's see how we can make this happen. He hired me as an intern for his office. Basically, I had come in at a point where Rice had been trying to compost for about 2 decades. Rice had been trying to compost since roughly 1999 in a variety of different ways, and it was a big challenge. So one of the things that I came in and tried to help them figure out was there are a lot of different ways to compost. We could build our own compost facility. We could collect and haul ourselves to a composting facility. We can get one of those fancy machines that accelerates and churns out this nutrient-dense liquid fertilizer. So what were we going to do? All of these things had a lot of hurdles and challenges. And about the same time that we were doing this, in that fall of 2020 before COVID, Moonshot showed up. And I started getting some emails in my inbox that Moonshot was a new business in Houston, and I brought it to housing and dining at Rice, sustainability office at Rice, and we kind of realized they solved a lot of our problems. They made things really easy for us. They were going to provide us the containers to collect. They were going to haul for us. They were going to take to Nature's Way Resources, which was the composting facility that we actually really wanted to take to because we have a good relationship with them. The Rice University does. Our master gardener here, Joe Novak, he has a good relationship with John Ferguson at Nature's Way. So it was kind of the perfect solution.
And can you tell us just what Nature's Way is? Is it just a composting facility, or is there other things that go on there?
They're a composting facility in Conroe. They also have a plant nursery, but their biggest thing is compost.
I know them from the plant nursery, which is why I was hinting at
Yes.
They do more than compost.
They do. But we know them for their compost, and they're very well known in the composting industry and really all across Texas for producing high-quality compost. So it was important to us at Rice that that's where we were taking things because of the process that they were undergoing to make sure that everything was high quality. So Moonshot really showed up and solved all of our problems, and so much so that now I work for them.
Well, we're glad that you were able to immediately transition into a natural fit out of university. Kristianna's heard me say this before, but one of the reasons I like talking about universities and thinking about them. Yes, I'm housed at one, so of course it's a big part of my life. But they're small cities in a way, and Rice is a very small city in many ways. Kristianna, I think you went to A&M, right? And so we think of College Station. That is a university that truly just is a small city. And so we get, I like what you're pointing at of like Rice, probably is not large enough to build its own large composting facility on campus, right? That would be a major use of space for us as a not massive institution. Whereas I could see somewhere like College Station absolutely wanting to develop that for themselves. But at the same time, it's interesting to think about we do have these neighboring sites that this can go and that it can be handled. And that it can also do things, I think, that we can't do kind of at home or in a small scale level. Because, I want to pause to like talk through a little bit the different ways that people do compost and do compost at home, which actually I think Moonshot thinks a lot about. But you want to
Yeah, we do. The word compost does a lot of work in the English language. It's a noun. It's a verb. When we're talking about compost, it's this finished product. It's the result of a natural process. And there's no connotation of quality in that word. And I'm just going to pause on that, and we can come back to it later. But we'll just assume that all compost is good.
Okay.
And then compost is also a verb. So it's you're composting something, right? And so it refers to that process. And there's a lot of ways to compost. Organic matter, left to its own devices, will decompose. We're trying to mimic essentially the processes from the forest floor where you have the proper balance of nitrogen-rich materials and carbon-rich materials to feed the appropriate bugs, fungus, and bacteria to do the good work of eating that stuff, basically, which is a reaction that's exothermic and it releases heat. So if you have a good pile of organic matter, whether it's in a tumbler in your backyard or whether it's a static pile at John Ferguson's facility at Nature's Way, those bugs are doing the work. And you just have to make sure that they're getting a steady supply of oxygen, that it's wet enough, and then those bugs have their own mechanism for slowing down when it gets too hot. So a pile will reach temperatures of 160 degrees just through the work of the bugs eating the organic matter.
So it's functional at 160 degrees.
It starts to slow down because the bugs get hot.
Okay.
And so there's this almost like sine curve of temperature where the bugs slow down, the temperature starts dropping, and then they come back alive. And so they start, not alive, but they reduce their dormancy, and they start eating again. And so this temperature goes up and down. What's great about that is at those high temperatures, they're destroying things like E. coli and other organisms that you don't want in a pile of organic matter once it's finished. And so this natural process, when it's run well, can really digest anything organic. So compost facilities that are large, we refer to them as industrial compost facilities, which I feel like is the wrong term because it's still just a pile of organic matter. There may be some large equipment moving these large piles around, but industrial to me connotes the wrong thing. It's not inside a warehouse.
It's not conveyor belts.
That's right. Although we get a pause on that too. Technology is coming for all of us, and so there are robots and there are conveyor belts that are getting involved. But yeah, so at different universities across the country, some of them like composting. We've been to presentations where we've heard about that in the Midwest. But what we always recommend people do is stick to what you want to do well, and find that lane and own it and kill it. And so Rice has done a very good job of publicizing that they have this program, of encouraging students to get bought in. We try to provide data and other storytelling mechanisms so that Rice can connect this program with its students. Rice sits in a perfect place in the city of Houston to be kind of foundational with everything that's happening in the city. That does not make it ideal for composting. Composting requires space. It can be smelly. So, Rice, I think, has done a good job of finding the partners that it needs to create great compost. And then twice a year, or as often as Rice wants it, we are bringing compost back that they can deploy here on campus.
Okay, well, that gives me several things I want to ask you about and follow up on. But one, that I'm curious about is, I will admit I've gone down some deep dives on my own of like, how could I try to do this at home in my tiny patio, which is, not super effective. But still, I've looked into all of the, everything from, I can put it in a pile. I could get a tumbler. I could, do the vermicompost thing, which is composting with worms, which still just seems really exciting to me.
I would go vermicomposting if I had a small patio. That seems like the best. You just have to bring them in if it gets too cold.
Well, this is the thing, because I feel like, especially, you can go in a deep dive on YouTube, right? And a lot of things really talk about the North or the Northeast, where huge population centers are. And it's a lot about, when it gets too cold, everything slows down. And here, it's so hot. And so I'm almost wondering, is there a little inverse here of like it gets too hot for us at times to really be effectively composting? But
the large facilities that are operating at scale, the heat is not a problem other than water. So all of these facilities are going to have some sort of water source that they're using to supplement. Houston being where it is, we're in Texas where we have large periods of drought interrupted by intense flooding. And so all these facilities will have tanks, places where they're gathering water, and then they're spraying it back on top of the piles. And so that rate of water transfer back onto the piles is something that you have to be careful of. Every compost facility is a tinderbox waiting to catch on fire if you make bad decisions. And so there are pictures available on the internet of compost facilities gone wrong that have caught on fire, because all it is material that could turn into a blaze. But through the use of water, almost every compost facility is able to keep things going on a regular basis. But even in the cold, Joe and I went to Denver to one of the oldest large compost facilities in the country called A1 Organics. We didn't plan this, but the trip just happened to be the first week of March during a huge blizzard. And we were out there with like ski masks on and hats and piles of snow everywhere except on top of the compost piles, which were steaming because the bugs don't stop eating. And you just saw the heat radiating off the piles. So the great thing is, if you're not doing it at home and you're doing it at scale, it just keeps going and there's just tweaks to the system. But I'm certain with worms, which I love, I wish we were doing our own vermicomposting, honestly.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about vermicomposting and how that works?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert, but one of the conferences that we went to very early in our journey at Moonshot was in Charleston, South Carolina, and they have a school of medicine there where they have a very large tray built by a very eccentric person who built these, I think, in the 70s or 80s, and 20 feet long, 15 feet wide, and you just put organic matter in there, and you can host hundreds of worms. And so they had a process for pre-digesting a little bit the food waste. They had 3 areas separated by a thin screen where they would bring some food waste and vegetative waste and mix it up, and they would progress them through those 3 staged areas. And then just after a few days, they would move it into a very large tray, and it looked like it had dirt in it. But what it really had was leaves and food waste. And every few days, it would shake, and out the bottom would fall compost. But what was amazing is these worms just never stopped moving. And if there was any contamination at all, like a plastic spoon, the worms push it up to the top. It's amazing to watch it happen.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I would recommend that to anyone. I don't know exactly how to do it, but it's foolproof. And you hate to think of worms as replaceable, but everything has a life cycle, and there's always more worms available, and
And
it
they also
really does.
multiply on their own too.
That's right, and it really does connect you to just how natural this process is. I mean, this is composting is what everything is doing all the time in the natural world, and so I think the simpler you can keep it, the better. So.
Well, and you mentioned plastic, and Kristianna, I think you might want to jump in here too, but this is something that, you were talking about industrial composting and this kind of difference between what's possible at home, where it is very, worms will push it at the top, a plastic spoon at the bottom is just never going to decompose. And not that, an industrial processor can, make certain things disappear, but the list of things that I can put into industrial compost looks radically different, even just at the level of things like certainly, meats will eventually decompose, but they are smelly and they attract predators and they attract, it's something that's always kind of top of the list of don't throw old animal products into your compost at home. But I've seen the rice serveries. I've seen, it's very much everything's kind of fair game when it moves to this industrial level. So can you talk us through a little bit what is the possibility when we move to that kind of industrial scale? I would love to know what the heck those compostable plastic silverware that I see places are. How does this stuff break down, and how is that different at the industrial level?
I can talk a little bit about this.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that is also important to know if you are wanting to start composting, the method of composting, you should think about what you want to compost. So if you're doing worms, if you're doing vermicomposting, they can take plant matter. In some places, it's been shown that they can digest fish. But so if you had a pescatarian diet, maybe you can go with worms. But if you have a diet where you're eating a lot of meat products, you probably don't want to do home composting. If you have a lot of yard space outside, you can do a static pile yourself. That's fine. Again, that's only vegetative waste. So if you want to compost meat products, if you want to compost the things that look like plastic that are compostable, or the ones that are made of bamboo or leaves, all of that kind of stuff, that's when you need the industrial scale because of that heat and the time. A lot of it comes down to that, the heat and the time to kill any of the harmful bacteria, organisms that live in the meat products and the dairy products, things that we don't want to come into contact with. And then same with the compostable products. So we operate using only BPI certified products.
Can you say more about what that means?
Yeah. So BPI is the Biodegradable Products Institute, and they have a standard of basically grading products to say, will this compost? And there's a difference here, and Chris and I and Moonshot talks about this a lot, the difference between compostable and biodegradable. And those two things are different. Compostable means that it will break down into its organic original parts and turn back into that organic natural compost product. It's part of the natural carbon cycle, the natural breakdown process. Something that biodegrades may still have microplastics in it. It may have plastic material, and sure, it will get smaller and smaller, and you may not be able to see it when it's mixed in with all the dirt, but it's not the same as compostable. So BPI certified is the standard that we use in our business across all the cities where we operate in terms of what we accept. So what Rice uses in their serveries and all of their dining spaces, Moonshot and Rice work together to look at what their vendors could purchase and which compostable products were actually BPI certified. So as long as they're BPI certified, we can take them and they go into those large piles at Nature's Way, and 12 to 18 months later, you could not identify a fork.
Wow.
Yeah. And there is some controversy around this topic in the country right now on what compost facilities who are making organic compost, and that is a designation that they can achieve through certain certifying institutions, whether they should be able to take, compostable plastics. And so thankfully in Houston, John Ferguson is a scientist and he believes in his own approach, and he is comfortable with anything that will break down during his very long compost process. There are some places in California where they're selling to organic farms where you cannot, even though there's no scientific research to suggest there's a problem at all with compostable packaging breaking down and going to an organic farm. It's just not allowed. And so that distinction, that controversy does have consequences. And it's something that operating where we are in Texas, there are some facilities that have different rules. and where we are geographically, because we operate in Houston, Austin, and Dallas, we let the compost facility where we're taking the food waste tell us what's acceptable for them, and then we work backwards with our subscribers and help them make business decisions about what type of packaging they want to use. A desire to use compostable packaging is good, and we want to, of course, always affirm it. But we also want to help you think about whether or not that's going to end up in the trash.
Yeah.
Because that packaging is more expensive. And if it's going to a landfill, ultimately, maybe don't spend the money on the more expensive packaging. And so those are hard conversations that we like to have with people so that they're not wish cycling. We want people to know exactly what the outcome of their decisions are, to get educated, and just to have confidence. So if someone at Rice says, where is this fork going? We can say, it is going exactly to this compost facility. It's breaking down. It's coming back in compost. And that certainty is what we feel like is so important.
And we saw that at John's facility. Ashley was fantastic enough to schedule a tour with John at Nature's Way for some of my students. Now, it was towards the end of the semester, busy people are busy with finals. But we actually even saw like compostable bags that you would see in our serveries or in your personal compost caddy in your room if you wanted one, and forks and things breaking down, which was just awesome for the students to see that, oh yeah, this truly is like compostable. It doesn't just say it on the label. It really is happening. So they got a big kick out of that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. I was curious. One of the things I was going to ask about is just kind of the time scale involved here. So it's really incredible just to hear. Yeah, I mean, that compostable fork might take a year. I'm imagining an apple core takes a lot less long.
Well, it all breaks down pretty fast. The reason that John spends more time, a year to make mulch, 18 months to make compost on average, is because it's everything else in the compost. So when I first got involved in this industry, I thought compost was about nutrients.
Yeah.
I thought it was about taking the nutrients from the plants, taking the nutrients from the food, and redeploying those back in the soil. That was my understanding of the circularity. John has helped me to understand it's a much more interesting and complex biological story. And compost, as I think of it now, is really just a substrate for all of these living things. And the reason he wants it to sit there longer is that it lets the fungi develop. It lets the bacteria develop. And I hate to call things good and bad. The world is not binary. But when it comes to gardening, there are certain types of bacteria and fungi that you want and certain times that you don't.
Yeah.
And the reason we call certain types good is when it shows up in the garden, it goes and eats the stuff that's harmful to plants.
Yeah.
That's just nature. That's just the balance. And so John is of the belief that by waiting 18 months, he is finding a very delicate balance between the geographically appropriate fungi, the geographically appropriate bacteria that like our water conditions, that like our heat conditions, that you want to take back to your gardens to go eat all the stuff you don't want to be there. So you can make compost, and even with compostable packaging, allow it to break down much faster than 18 months. But he's doing something bigger, he believes, to really create compost that does maximum good once it hits the ground in your garden or front lawn.
Well, and that time component, I think, even if it's not 18 months, helps to really explain, I will admit, enjoying my little patio garden, going to the store and being like, I'm sorry, how much am I paying for a bag of compost? Which is, I think, for a lot of people, one of the motivators of why they think about home composting. I think the two camps are either like, I want to reduce my waste, or like, no, I want the stuff from my garden. Like, I want that special soil that's going to make things grow. And that's basically what we know about it, as like compost good for plants. And that's kind of the thought. And exactly what you're pointing out about that balance, that time component, you even mentioning, like, oh, it smells and it is smelly. But it's also like, that's a balance thing, right? Like, it smells really bad if your balance is off and it's like way too much nitrogen in this. But actually, when you have a pretty balanced compost pile, it smells like dirt.
Right.
That's what it smells like.
It should have an earthy smell, and that's what we tell people who are trying to do this at home if they ever ask for advice. Usually, if there's a problem, if you're noticing a problem, you probably need to add more brown material. You probably need to add more wood chips, dead leaves, things like that, things that will absorb some of that moisture and smell. We always like to kind of say in this world, food does have a smell, so your food waste is going to have a smell.
Yeah.
But if we're taking it to be composted in an appropriate timeline, you shouldn't be dealing with a gross, decaying food waste smell in your home. And if you ever hit that point, there's probably something else at play that we can talk about and help you fix. So we always like to tell our subscribers and commercial customers, if they notice problems like that with smell, let us know as soon as you know, because then we can troubleshoot. You shouldn't be having that problem. We pick up at least a minimum once a week to help make sure that that does not happen.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, smells can be present. It's food. Food has smell. Banana peel has a smell.
Yeah.
So your compost, if you put an entire bucket of banana peels in there, it's going to smell like banana peels.
Yeah.
I'm impressed with the person who's going through a bucket of bananas every week. That's their potassium levels must be just fantastic. But so, I mean, the other big piece of this, I think, is the food waste component, which, both nods to, we just hit this milestone at Rice of the 1 million pounds that everyone's very excited about. But also, I'm curious about, I think that is an important part of this, is actually it helps us reduce waste. And I'm curious about what that means for Houston, too, which is part of a broader conversation around, everybody's nervous local issue of, are we going to get a garbage, fee of some kind that seems to be this constant specter that comes up every 2 or 3 years to city council. But we're not. We're notably one of I believe the only major city in Texas without a garbage fee. It's about $100 million a year in taxes that get paid out to take care of the city's garbage instead. And notably, our waste levels are higher than most of the other big cities in Texas. We have a higher average waste than most of the country. And especially if we start comparing ourselves internationally to places like Germany, where there are very stringent restrictions and rules around waste. And when I lived in Germany, I will just say anecdotally, like, people give you very stern looks if you throw things in the trash. And they're like, that doesn't need to be in the trash, because there are expensive fees attached to how much waste is coming out. And all of that seems like it would naturally drive people to want to compost, right? These are natural things to make us go, oh, okay, actually, the less waste we're putting out, the cheaper this is for me. And that may be true at the Rice level. That may be true at like major kind of commercial institutions where you've got a lot of waste coming out. But for individuals, it's not a motivator here. And so I'm wondering if you have thoughts on, ways that we can encourage Houstonians to get involved and to think about this, beyond just this is good for my soil, this is good for, it's many things come down to pocketbook issues. And so this is part of a larger conversation in the city around how we handle our waste. And I just want to give you some space to talk about, that side of this reality.
We think about this a lot, and I love knowing that you do too. There are not a lot of people that sit around and think about waste a lot for all the obvious reasons. I mean, you sort of grow up having this relationship with the nearest trash can, and the nearest trash can is very accepting of all your mistakes. You just put it all in there and walk away. And depending on your age, you've been doing that for decades. Yeah. And so it's really tricky to catch someone and to say, hey, have you ever thought about how much better you could be to your trash? And it's our observation that attitudes around waste are very cultural, and that something that works in South Korea, where they have almost no food waste going to landfills, may not be a practice that works well in Europe. And what works well in Europe may not be a practice that works well in the U.S. at large. And what works in the Northeast or in California may not work well in Texas. And so accepting, acknowledging, and working within the confines of these cultural differences is step one. What you pointed out about the city of Houston's preference for low taxation and not having fees is accurate. It is a huge problem for our solid waste department here in Houston that 100% of its budget comes from the city of Houston's budget. It's not supported by a separate fee. Because of that, their trucks are older, maintenance is behind, and they can't spend the time and attention that they would like to change the nature of the trash stream that they have. But we will say, anecdotally, working in Austin, you also have to, and having friends in Denver, you have to be careful about the kind of mandates that you put in place, because it starts to create a compliance response from people where they're just looking for the cheapest way to divert food waste because it's required by law. Or at someone's home, you deliver a new can and you say, this can is free, but this trash can costs money. Anything goes there. Well, all of a sudden, people start putting all the trash in the free bin, which is the compost bin, and contamination levels go through the roof. And so what we think about by practicing our business in areas where there are no mandates, how can we inspire people to want to do this? Smaller, clean streams are better than larger contaminated streams. contamination. Once you have a contaminated stream of any recycled material, it's trash. It's so hard. The robots aren't there yet.
Yeah.
And food waste is so wet. It's so hard to pull, contamination out. So we have things like our diversion dashboard. We weigh everything we collect. Every one of our residential subscribers receives a complimentary dashboard where they get to see how much they've diverted. They get to see how much their community is diverted with Moonshot, and that rolls up to how much the City of Houston is diverted. We've got something we call the Mooniverse on our website where you can go on there and see how many people are participating. We're in conversations with HOAs and cities to try to run programs like this out more broadly. Once people start to compost, they don't stop. We've got data to support that. We think Moonshot's great, but we think composting is really what it is, and we're just kind of the conduit for that in some people's lives. So it's always our preference to find the largest organizations that want to inspire their constituent people to do this and to work with them to do that, to create good data, to create good storytelling. Once people start, they don't stop. And I'd much rather have a 10-year plan to attack a city or a community to try to start as many people as possible over 10 years rather than to mandate it and say you have to do it. That really moves all the problems to areas that people don't see. And the resulting compost, I mentioned earlier, we talked about compost quality, is so poor that you can't sell it. And I won't use any names, but we have been to compost facilities where there are curbside programs, and they have contractual relationships with the city where they're like, please buy this back because we can't sell it to anyone. And when I think about how much work we do at Moonshot to create streams of food waste, it would kill me if the resulting compost was so bad you couldn't sell it. It would just make me feel like everything we've done was for naught. So I think we have to be very honest and transparent when we have conversations around, should we require composting? I think you should make it available to people that want to opt in. And then, those opt-in programs, we should make the most inspiring things possible so it's contagious. And you end up with something like what we have in Germany where people are like giving you the side eye if you're not behaving appropriately. And that to me feels like something that could be successful over time. It may not deliver the immediate shock results you're looking for, but it's sustainable.
Yeah.
And by sustainable, I mean something that could continue because it's making good compost at the end.
Well, and to your point, it becomes the cultural norm, and that's a major change. The other part of this that I'd love to hear from you, Kristianna, on is just I will say, from my limited experience in the cafeterias here on campus, it's incredibly easy. You take the plate and you drop it in the bin, and it's pretty much what it is. There are a couple of things you might have to sort, but it's pretty straightforward. And so part of this just feels like, how do we make this as easy as possible? And I'm curious if you can talk about some of the steps around education that the university has done, but also things that might be things that if one of the hospitals in the med center wants to start a composting program and doesn't already have one, like what are steps that you would advise just to make this as clear and easy for people to embrace as possible?
Well, I'm very fortunate that when I came into Rice a year and a half ago, Ashley had done a bang-up job at getting us set up. So she did most of my job for me, getting us started in the beginning. But some of the things that we utilize here on campus is obviously signage right at the dish return areas of each of our serveries. So there's a giant sign, again, that Ashley created, that has pictures and words as to what goes in the trash with a giant arrow pointing down to the exact trash can it's supposed to go into. And the same thing for all of the compostable materials that come out of our serveries, whether that's food or like the takeaway plates, cups, and things like that are compostable. I also utilize my wonderful peer educators, our eco-reps. So they are student employees of the Office of Sustainability. There are 2 per each of our residential colleges. And they really work with me to get the word out about all of our sustainability programming, but especially composting at the beginning of the year when we have all of our brand new, big-eyed, excited owls coming to campus for the first time. We do compost volunteering. So they work with their college peers to set up monitoring of the dish return areas for the first couple of weeks of school in the beginning of each semester, but especially the fall, and basically just sit there and educate their peers as they come, like, hey, have you composted on campus before? Are you a freshman and aren't completely sure? Let us walk you through what can and can't go in this space. We also have incorporated Canvas modules. So for all of the incoming students, they have a series of optional and required Canvas modules online to do as they're preparing to come to Rice, giving them outlines of resources, programs, things available to them as they prepare to come back to campus or come to campus for the first time. And we have a whole dedicated PowerPoint outlining the compost program, what housing and dining does ahead of time to reduce and mitigate waste generation, and then how they can responsibly participate in composting. I always advise my eco reps, if they are ever unsure and can't get a hold of me, if it's late in the evenings or something, or they get a random question where it's like, I'm not 100% sure, I always tell them to err on the side of caution and toss something versus falling into that wish cycling, or in this case, wish composting pattern, because we certainly don't want to contaminate the stream that's going to John's facility. Because then, Moonshot picks it up, notices it's contaminated, then they have to deal with it, which just adds to their strain. So it's always better to be safe than sorry is what I tell my students. And then we can work on them getting into contact with me confirming with Chris, Joe, Ashley, and Housing and Dining, hey, I got this random question. Is this okay or is this not? And then we can work on educating from there.
Well, and that's kind of perfectly segues then, Ashley, since you were so instrumental in getting this running here. I'm curious, as we're running out of time here, to end on, what is your advice for folks who are, either want to start composting at home or maybe, have a business that they're like, hey, we could do this at the business level. But, to bring this out a little bit more into the world, since you've set up these programs, since you've been so instrumental, I'm curious, what are the steps you'd recommend people take?
Yeah, I always think it's a little bit different based on what people's motivations are. So usually my first thing when I'm talking to somebody is figuring out why they want to do this. Are they doing this because they're in Austin and they're required to? Are they doing this because they produce a lot of food waste at home and they just want a solution for it? Do they want the compost back? Are they working towards a ESG goal? Do they have a food waste diversion goal by 2030? So usually I kind of start there and figure out why are we doing this? And then usually I give them some data and tell them like, okay, well, did you know that about a quarter of our landfill space is occupied by food, and 58% of methane emissions from our landfills come from food, and that 40% of all of the food that we produce in the U.S. goes to the landfill where it produces methane. And those are a lot of, big numbers that are sometimes hard for people to understand. So then we pull out compost and we show people what compost looks like. We show them what it can do for them if they divert that food waste, get it back in compost. We talk about ways that you can use compost in gardens, or for a lot of our corporates and commercial subscribers, even, the hospitals in Houston, they may not have a use for it on site, so we help them learn how they can donate that to community gardens and just help people understand that this is creating a closed loop food cycle, that they're entering into a natural part of Earth cycles, that they're going into this for the right reasons. There's environmental benefits. Sometimes people don't care about the environmental benefits, so we talk about potential cost savings, things like that. Ideally, if we can get somebody interested in this for the environmental impact, to be able to divert that food waste, to make a good impact, to have something tangible come back. I think that's one of the biggest selling points for this and for what we do at Moonshot, is that people actually get to see that final product come back to them. And it helps people just recognize what that impact is. It can be really hard to understand, well, we've composted 1 million pounds. What does that mean? But if you actually get students involved, you go to the campus garden and you have students touching the physical compost that Rice's food waste was a part of making, that full cycle kind of clicks in people's minds. And I think that's really what I would like to have people learn. I want people to learn more about that full closed loop cycle and what the impact is. And then once people understand that impact, I think people are more likely to start composting in whatever way makes sense for them. And also, it's not that hard. It's really not. People always come to me and they say, well, we're already struggling with recycling. How are we going to do this? Well, recycling is really hard, and it's different in every state and every country. Even sometimes it's different city to city within the same state. But composting is food. It's food only. If it was edible, if it came from the ground, if it was once alive, it can be composted. So the messaging around that is so much simpler. So I think once people start to realize like, oh, okay, this is actually easier than recycling and it has this good impact. And when I recycle something, I may never actually see the output of that recycle process, but they'll see their compost back. So I think getting people motivated for the right reasons is really helpful. I'm sure Kristianna and Chris have some other thoughts on this too.
Chris, you look like you want to jump in.
Yeah.
Oh, no. I thought you nailed it. Ashley, I think it really is about identifying what people are after and what they want to achieve from a diversion program. The other thing that we tell people is wherever you want to end up, start small. It's possible to typically get 80% of the benefit from 20% of the effort. Let's examine where most of the food waste is being generated at your organization. Let's design a program that has the smallest impact on your operations to collect that. If after a few months everyone likes that, then you can start adding success to success and trying new things, trying other locations. But we don't want to make it seem so hard to start that it's easy to put it off to next year. So we use the word pilot and slap it on everything. When you do that, it gives people permission to fail.
Yeah.
And it creates some headway for people's bosses. Like, hey, if this doesn't work, we're going to try something else. And so we'll slap the word pilot on almost anything, and it gives people the freedom to be creative and try new things.
I think people get caught up in creating the perfect solution to a problem. One of the things I really like about the sustainability field is it feels like one of the spaces where it's okay to have an imperfect solution, and that any effort that you're making, any progress, any step in the right direction is a step in the right direction, and that can be celebrated. And I think that's also an important thing to relay to people who are getting started in this is any food waste that you're diverting is better than no food waste being diverted. You don't need to have the perfect program to start. You can do a pilot and make a small impact and grow that impact over time. And that's one of the things that I do just really like about the sustainability world.
And that's one of the things that data helps with. We weigh everything that we collect. And we feel like that's important because it takes some of the pressure off. I need to have a compost collection bin everywhere on campus so people can see we're doing this. We're weighing everything. So at the end of every month, you get a report that says a lot of people are doing this. Because too many collection bins, that's another way you end up with contamination. That gets expensive. You're buying a lot of containers. You're having to have your team collect a lot of things. So getting good data takes some of the pressure off as well.
And that has been invaluable. One of the things that we're doing now is we're redoing the signs that Ashley had originally created, since 2020, and we're tailoring them to each of the college's dish return areas with their college colors, their traditions, their phrases. We're also including, because Moonshot has the diversion dashboard for all of their customers, each servery has their own dashboard. So you can see month to month what your servery is doing, whether that's West, South, Cybele. And we're including that QR code in the dish return signage so they can scan and really see the impact that they're making by responsibly, composting whatever food waste they have. So we're really excited about that. And then we do a monthly, based on the monthly reports that we get from Moonshot. My zero waste intern, Isabel Chang, who took over Ashley's intern position when she graduated, she started a monthly Keeping You Composted series that we post in collaboration with Housing and Dining to just make people aware of, hey, this past month, here's how much we composted across campus. Here's which serveries composted the most. And hey, as a gentle reminder, here's what can and can't go in that space.
Well, this has been a delight chatting with you all. I have learned a great deal. I feel newly inspired probably to go out and try vermicomposting now. So thank you so much for joining us. And Chris Wood, Ashley Fitzpatrick, and Kristianna Bowles, it has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we have another short piece from our researcher, Alex, who will tell you all about what you can do to make the world a little bit cleaner and greener all on your own.
Hey y'all, it's Alex. I'm here to talk about more ways you can reduce your emissions with just some simple at-home changes. Today, I'm going to talk about what's going on with your lawn. So according to the National Audubon Society, the continental U.S. lost over 150 million acres of native habitats due to urbanization and sprawl. Urbanization saw the introduction of foreign plants for aesthetics. However, these species often became invasive as they outcompeted native species and influenced the surrounding food systems. Many urban areas have a relatively homogenized landscape, ones that have been artificially populated with economically valuable species or even just visibly aesthetic ones. This can have serious implications when it comes to genetic diversity and the spread of disease. When we have a group of very genetically similar plants grown generation after generation in the same soil, these populations become increasingly susceptible to diseases and pests. In short, we swapped out all of our native plants and replaced them with new ones, and now that's not really ideal. It's important to understand the impact this has on other animals. Many species are adapted to the native plants which once populated our lawns. The loss of these plants as critical habitats and food sources has the potential to degrade biodiversity altogether. That's why it's important that we bring back some of these native species. When we plant native, we're inviting biodiversity back into our spaces. For example, pollinators, such as hummingbirds, bees, and butterflies, are dependent on native sources a lot of the time. You'll be surprised with what you can find just in your backyard when you reintroduce native plants. Another great benefit of planting native is a reduction in your water bill. Because native plants are adapted to your local conditions, they often can survive with significantly less water than those which are not fit for your backyard. Of course, this has implications much beyond yourself. Particularly in Texas, it's important to conserve water as a valuable resource just altogether. Also, native plants encourage the presence of insects and microorganisms that can keep your soil healthy, reducing the need for harmful pesticides or fertilizers, which can actually hurt the environment. Many native plants require less maintenance, such as mowing, and are particularly effective at consuming carbon dioxide, especially native trees, which can survive for centuries. Essentially, planting native can help you reduce both your emissions and consumption when done properly. However, I want to highlight a comment ecologist Suzanne Simpson made in one of Gulfstream's interviews with her a couple weeks back. While discussing the importance of planting native, Suzanne said not to let perfect be the enemy of good when it came to our lawns. She was referring to our approaches when it comes to reconstructing a climate-friendly lawn. If you'd like to listen to our whole conversation, it's posted in episode 37, titled Wild Houston. So, what Suzanne's saying is, even if you want to replace your lawn entirely with native plants, it may be more conscientious to work with what you already have. According to the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center at the University of Texas, even planting just a few native plants can help improve your garden. Perhaps you don't necessarily need to rip out everything that's already there, but just ensure that you provide a space for native plants to thrive. Okay, so I've talked a lot about why planting native is important, and now I have a ton of stuff to say about how to actually do it. I came prepared with some examples for any listeners living in the Texas Gulf region, but a note to keep in mind is that this is by no means a comprehensive list. I organized some plants by category and chose a select few as examples, mostly based on which had the coolest name, but I recommend doing some personal research to find out which plants will best suit your lawn. If you have a big sunny plot of grass in your backyard, this is the perfect environment to introduce Texas wildflowers. These are excellent pollinators and require very little maintenance, and additionally can provide some really nice color to your lawn. For anyone who's a fan of flowering plants, you can look for the tall Texas native blazing star, rough leaf coneflowers, or the smaller frog fruit. If you want to attract pollinators like bees, butterflies, and birds into your yard, there's a whole class of native plants which will do just that. Some examples include native milkweeds, blue and scarlet sage, rattlesnake master, and the coral honeysuckle, which actually attracts hummingbirds. For more shaded yards, there are many small trees and shrubs which thrive in Texas's shade. Some include the strawberry bush, fringe tree, and the pigeonberry. And finally, if you're like many people in the Gulf region and you live in a marsh environment, bald cypress trees, sweet bay magnolias, Virginia sweet spires, and iris plants are some of the many species which can thrive in your yard. What native means to your yard is different based on where you live, so do some quick research to help best inform which plants you should look for. I hope you learned something, or at least enjoyed hearing it. Thank you all so much for listening.
And lastly, our researcher Jessica will tell you how you can get involved around Houston this week.
Hello, this is Jessica with an exciting opportunity to get involved this week. The Coastal Prairie Conservancy is a nonprofit organization based in Houston that works to conserve over 30,000 protection acres of prairie and wetland across the Gulf Coast, including the Katy Prairie Preserve. Look to join in bi-weekly volunteering efforts on the Indian Grass Preserve from 9 a.m. until 1 p.m. on Tuesdays and Fridays. On select weekends, those interested can find volunteer opportunities for stewardship Saturdays at various coastal prairie locations across Houston. Volunteers plant native species and complete other projects on the preserve so that all visitors can enjoy it. They are starting an exciting new project aiming to plant 20,000 milkweed plants for monarch butterflies from 2024 to 2026. A great way to familiarize yourself with this new effort is by joining the 20,000 Milkweeds Project webinar for volunteers, which will be from 12 p.m. until 1 p.m. this upcoming Tuesday, June 25th. To register for the webinar, please visit the event calendar on cechouston.org to discover how you can contribute to achieving this goal. For those interested in learning more about advocacy and conservation strategies, check out coastalprairieconservancy.org for information on native plants, the impacts of climate change on land near Houston, and to download free fact sheets on all kinds of environmentally related topics. For those interested in staying updated with the Coastal Prairie Conservancy's work, sign up for their newsletter on their website to learn more about weekly efforts to restore and promote awareness toward these vitally important coastal ecosystems.
Next time on Gulf Streams, we'll be talking all about moving because of climate change, or what's called managed retreat, and how communities can lead the way in where they go next. A quick reminder that you can catch up on Gulf Streams anytime through our podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you have questions or ideas for what you'd like featured on Gulf Streams, leave a voicemail at 713-348-4081 or email us at westonT@rice.edu. Gulf Streams is a co-production of KPFT Houston and Rice's Center for Environmental Studies, with support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and the Rice Sustainability Institute's Eco Studio. Produced by Weston Twardowski, co-produced by Joseph Campana, audio engineer Rico Enriquez, research support provided by Jaden Bray-Boyce and Sienna Yen. Stay tuned for the R&R Show with Ronnie Renfro and Tom Richards here on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM.